Reality star Todd Chrisley is finally revealing what the warden's punishment was for him pushing back. His daughter, Savannah Chrisley, already stated that there was payback when it came to her speaking up. So what happened with Todd when he was behind bars? Keep reading for more details. Although it seems that Todd Chrisley had a better experience behind bars than his wife, Julie, there was also a lot of pain. He looked incredible when he was pardoned and released, with many wondering what he had done the second he got home. Todd was fresh-faced and detailed the food he had in prison, which was the polar opposite of Julie Chrisley. She came out with dark hair and empty eyes, fans hoping she was getting therapy for the pain and suffering. With the family's new series, Back to Reality, currently airing on Lifetime, Todd is spilling a lot of tea. Todd just dished on what happened with the warden when he would fight and push back. There had been rumblings that Todd and his cellmates were frequently punished, but how so? He was asked if he and Julie could communicate at all when he was locked up, and he said no. Furthermore, he claimed it was his warden's doing, but she is no longer with the prison thanks to Savannah's help. Moreover, the prison is closing down due to abuse. So that is a win for the family. Todd Chrisley noted that Sherry, who was the warden, used her power to keep him and his wife apart. This was her way of getting back at Todd for exposing her wrongdoings and the truth that was being hidden. Interestingly enough, Julie Chrisley had a warden who would have allowed the couple to speak. However, his warden did not, and this lasted his whole sentence. Ultimately, Todd stated that he was trying to shut his camp down, which Julie was not. Many followers and fans are so excited to see Julie and Todd Chrisley reunite and how they are in the early days of being released. Yet, others have noted that what happened between Todd and the warden all boiled down to hate. They believe that Todd was hated so much that he was punished for that sole reason, rather than him exposing the cruelty of the prison. Regardless, Savannah Chrisley has shared that she and her father worked hard to change the ways in Pensacola. With that said, it caused major repercussions for Todd Chrisley, and now he is sharing the story. Do you think the warden hated Todd and the way he pushed back, or was it a long-standing grudge? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Todd Chrisley, the notorious patriarch of the Chrisley Knows best family, has always been known for his sharp wit, unapologetic attitude, and lavish lifestyle. However, behind his glitzy veneer, a different side of Todd had begun to surface following his legal battles. In a revealing story, Todd opens up about the unexpected consequences he faced while serving time in prison, all stemming from a single defiant moment of pushing back against the warden's authority. The story begins just days after Todd had been incarcerated. While he had expected the rough conditions of prison life, he was also accustomed to a certain level of comfort and control. Prison, as most would imagine, wasn't quite the glamorous world he was used to, but the level of restraint and deprivation felt foreign. The prison staff and warden had their own code of conduct, a strict regimen designed to keep the inmates in line. But Todd, ever the free spirit, was never one to bow to authority. It was an ordinary morning, the kind where the harsh fluorescent lights flickered slightly as guards shuffled along the hallways, and the muffled sounds of footsteps echoed down the concrete floors. Todd, sitting in his sparse cell, had begun to notice something unsettling. The warden seemed to be testing the boundaries of what was acceptable for inmates. This included arbitrary and sometimes overly harsh punishments for minor infractions. It was the kind of small act of cruelty that Todd had little tolerance for, especially after everything he had endured. The tension between Todd and the warden had been brewing for some time. Todd had never been one to remain silent, and his insistence on fairness had often put him at odds with the prison's hierarchy. One day, as Todd stood in line for his lunch, he noticed that a fellow inmate, a man who had been a model prisoner, was abruptly ordered to step out of line. The reason? A minor slip-up, perhaps an unintentional gesture that was interpreted as disrespect. It was this moment that Todd could no longer ignore. Despite the risk of retaliation, he couldn't stand by and watch an innocent man be punished. As the warden approached, Todd stood his ground, asking for an explanation. He had been quietly observing the way the warden was running the place, and it was clear that Todd was growing increasingly dissatisfied with what he saw as a reign of tyranny. The warden, however, wasn't accustomed to being challenged. "You know the rules," Warden had snapped, his voice icy. "If you don't like it, you can deal with the consequences." But Todd wasn't backing down. For a moment, the two men locked eyes. It wasn't an outright rebellion, but a quiet, determined defiance. Todd spoke of fairness, of the need to treat inmates with respect, but his words fell on deaf ears. In that moment, Todd realized that there would be consequences. The warden's pride had been wounded, and he wasn't one to let something like that slide. The aftermath was swift and brutal. Todd was moved to a solitary confinement cell, a place reserved for the most disruptive and non-compliant inmates. It wasn't the first time he had been in isolation, but this time felt different. The walls seemed to close in on him as the cold, lifeless air of the small, gray room pressed against his chest. Alone, without the comfort of family or the usual distractions, Todd's mind began to race. He knew that he had made an enemy in the warden, but he also felt the sense of pride. In that moment, he had stood up for what he believed in, even at great personal cost. Days turned into weeks, and Todd's situation grew more complicated. The warden, never one to show weakness, decided to escalate matters. He pulled strings to ensure Todd would endure even harsher conditions. Each morning, Todd would be woken up before dawn, forced to march across the prison yard for hours. His meals were sparse, and he was subjected to constant interrogations. But through it all, Todd held onto the one thing he could control: his resolve. His time in solitary confinement became a trial of endurance. The isolation gnawed at his spirit, but Todd refused to let it break him. He began to reflect on his past, the flashy lifestyle, the million-dollar homes, the jet-setting lifestyle that had come crashing down. He thought of his family, his children, and how they had all suffered because of the legal mess he had created. It was a sobering realization, and it left Todd questioning everything he had taken for granted. But Todd's resilience was what set him apart. He knew that his time in prison wasn't just about serving his sentence. It was about redemption. He had spent so many years in the spotlight, playing the role of the perfect patriarch, but now, in the shadows of the prison walls, he saw things differently. He knew that if he was going to make it through this ordeal, he would have to find a way to not only survive but to come out on the other side with a renewed sense of purpose. The warden, however, didn't see Todd's transformation. Instead, he saw a man who had defied him, someone who had dared to challenge the system. He continued to escalate Todd's punishment, finding new ways to break his spirit. But the more the warden pushed, the more Todd dug in his heels. The harsher the conditions, the stronger his resolve became. Todd eventually found allies among the prison population. The other inmates, many of whom had witnessed his defiance, respected his refusal to bow down. Todd began to see that even in the harshest of environments, there was power in standing up for what was right. The warden, however, refused to back down. In a twisted show of dominance, he began to move Todd around the prison, never letting him settle in one place for too long. Each time Todd found some semblance of peace, it was ripped away. As the months dragged on, the warden's vendetta against Todd began to wear thin. Other guards started to question his methods, and rumors of the warden's cruelty began to spread throughout the facility. The warden's reputation, once held in high regard, began to crumble. His overzealous treatment of Todd had sparked unrest, and whispers of reform began to circulate. Despite the relentless punishment, Todd's resolve never wavered. He used his time in confinement to strengthen his resolve, to reflect on his past mistakes, and to find clarity. In the end, it wasn't the warden's punishment that had the final word. It was Todd's ability to endure, to hold onto his humanity in the face of adversity. When Todd was eventually released from solitary, he was a different man. He had endured the warden's harsh tactics and had come out stronger for it. The warden, on the other hand, had become a shadow of his former self. His authority had been questioned, and his cruelty had exposed the cracks in the prison system. Todd, ever the survivor, had emerged from the ordeal with a new perspective, one that he would carry with him for the rest of his life. In the end, Todd Chrisley's story is one of defiance, survival, and transformation. Despite the warden's attempts to break him, Todd remained unbroken. His journey through the prison system was a testament to his strength, resilience, and ability to find purpose even in the darkest of times. And while the warden may have believed that his punishment would teach Todd a lesson, it was Todd who ultimately came out victorious, not through revenge, but through his unwavering commitment to